Rich billionaire left pregnant wife in the middle of nowhere, then filed for divorce the next morning. Isabella sat on the edge of a deserted highway, tears mingling with the dust on her cheeks, a single suitcase beside her. She watched as her husband, Richard, sped away in his gleaming Tesla Model S, leaving her stranded with nothing but the clothes on her back and the baby growing inside her. Just 24 hours earlier, she believed she was living a fairy tale life, married to a millionaire who promised her the world. But now, her voice trembled with disbelief, anger, and heartbreak as she whispered, "He just left me here." Little did Richard know that fate was already plotting its payback. Isabella had always believed in fairy tales. Growing up in a small town in rural Oregon, she spent her childhood poring over glossy magazines, reading about glamorous celebrities and their whirlwind romances. In her mind, marriage was a sacred union of love and devotion, a partnership that would stand the test of time. When she first set eyes on Richard Davenport, an elegantly dressed stranger at her cousin's wedding in Portland, she had felt a spark of curiosity. He seemed so self-assured, wearing a charcoal grey suit and an expensive watch that glimmered in the afternoon sun. His smile held promises she couldn't decode yet, but something about him pulled her in. Richard's introduction was brief that day. They exchanged pleasantries, clinked champagne glasses, and parted ways before midnight. But he found her phone number through a mutual friend, leaving her both surprised and secretly delighted when he called a week later. Their first official date was at a 5-star restaurant in downtown Portland. She arrived in a simple black dress and borrowed heels, he in a tailored suit with a glimmering tie clip. The moment she slipped into the seat across from him, he reached for her hand. That single touch was all it took for her to tumble headlong into a world that felt far removed from her humble upbringing. In the following months, Richard introduced her to a life of luxury she had only seen in magazines. Expensive dinners, lavish gifts, and spontaneous weekend getaways became the norm. Isabella's heart soared each time he praised her beauty or slipped a new piece of jewelry onto her wrist. Yet, beneath the sparkle, something about Richard always felt guarded. She tried to shrug it off, telling herself that he was a busy entrepreneur, juggling multiple business ventures. After all, he possessed a commanding presence in almost any room. People called him the Midas of real estate. The stories of his success were impressive. He had started flipping small homes in college before expanding into commercial properties across the West Coast. By the time Isabella met him, he was on every local under 40 success list. Their relationship heated up quickly. Richard never liked small talk. Instead, he proposed sweeping ideas about the future. He wanted to marry early, to have the quintessential trophy wife by his side at networking events, philanthropic galas, and industry conferences. Isabella had never seen herself as a trophy. She loved reading, crocheting, and listening to country music. However, she couldn't deny how his attention made her feel. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her aspirations, and her dreams, or at least, that's what she believed. One snowy evening, just 6 months after they met, Richard proposed. They were at a ski resort near Mount Hood, warming themselves by the fireplace with cups of hot chocolate. He slid a breathtaking diamond ring onto her finger. Overwhelmed by the magic of the moment, Isabella couldn't speak, but his voice was smooth, like velvet on a cold night. "You're everything I've dreamed of, Bella." The ring sparkled in the flicker of the flames, and she thought she was indeed living her own Cinderella story. They married 2 months later in a luxurious ceremony at the Benson Hotel in Portland, a real landmark venue known for its opulent ballrooms and old-world charm. The day was a whirlwind of white roses and crystal chandeliers, the kind of wedding that ended up in society columns. Isabella's mother cried happy tears. Her father, wide-eyed at the extravagance, prayed that this grand love would last. For Isabella, it was a turning point. Standing in front of 100 guests, she felt like the luckiest woman on earth. But even amidst the celebration, Isabella noticed the faintest of cracks in Richard's facade. He barked orders at the wedding planner and scolded a server who accidentally spilled champagne on the carpet. She told herself it was just the stress of the wedding. The very next day, they flew first class to Tahiti for their honeymoon, where Richard showered her with attention and more gifts. Sitting on the beach, toes in the sand, Isabella breathed in the salty air and thought, "This is what perfect feels like." Little did she know, her happily ever after was about to morph into a nightmare. A nightmare that began with an unexpected pregnancy, leading to the day he left her at the edge of a dusty road and the heartbreak that followed. The first few months of married life continued like a dream, or perhaps more accurately, a mirage. Isabella's world was a whirlwind of social events and philanthropic functions, where Richard took every opportunity to impress his peers. She found herself wearing designer gowns, sipping champagne with society's elite, and occasionally feeling lost amid the clinking glasses and polite laughter. Each time she looked at Richard, though, her heart fluttered. Despite a few snide remarks about her small-town roots, comments from Richard's associates that he never outright refuted, she believed love would conquer all. But underneath the polished veneer, trouble brewed. Richard's work hours grew longer, and the demands on Isabella's time became equally pressing. He insisted that she attend certain charity balls, that she host dinner parties for potential business investors, and that she maintain a spotless image. She wasn't just Isabella anymore. She felt she had become Miss S. Davenport, a role that came with its own set of unspoken rules and expectations. At first, she tried to comply wholeheartedly, wanting to be the perfect partner. She spent hours perfecting table settings, learning which wine paired best with salmon, and studying the names of his business associates so as not to slip up at a soiree. A few close friends from Isabella's old life worried that she was losing her sense of self. They noticed how she no longer called, how her once lively voice grew cautious. When her childhood best friend, Natalie, visited one weekend, she couldn't help but voice her concerns. "What happened to you, Bella? You used to sing off-key and dance barefoot. Now you're wearing 5-inch heels and forced smiles." Isabella tried to brush it off. "I'm happy," she said, plastering on a smile she'd perfected for camera flashes. "Richard is amazing. We have everything we need." But her tone wavered, and Natalie noticed. 1 month after her friend's visit, Isabella discovered she was pregnant. She found out by chance, in a rush of morning nausea that wouldn't go away. Sitting in the pristine marble-floored bathroom of their Beverly Hills penthouse, one of Richard's latest property investments, she stared at the positive test stick in disbelief. Her heart raced, torn between excitement and a gnawing fear. She recalled how Richard had once mentioned he wasn't certain about wanting children just yet, but that was a vague comment. Her mind spun with questions. Would he be thrilled? Would he be angry? She broke the news to him that evening. Richard was seated at his gleaming mahogany desk, poring over financial reports. Placing the test on the edge of the desk, her hands trembled. "Richard," she said softly, "I'm pregnant." He blinked, his expression momentarily blank. Then, closing his laptop with forced composure, he took a sharp breath. How far along?" "About 6 weeks," she replied, voice quivering with uncertainty. He stood up, paced back and forth across the plush carpet, then finally turned to face her. "Isabella, this changes everything," he said, his voice tighter than usual. "I have major deals in the pipeline, massive expansions. A baby wasn't in my immediate plans." She felt a pang in her chest, but still tried to remain calm. "We'll figure it out together, right?" she asked, searching his face for a sign of empathy. He hesitated a moment too long. "Yes," he finally said, crossing the room to hold her shoulders. "It's just, this is unexpected. We'll talk more in the morning." That night, Isabella lay in bed, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. Richard remained stone still beside her, as if carefully measuring his every breath. She listened for any sign of reassurance, a soft whisper, a comforting hand, but received nothing. Over the next few days, he became distant and irritable. Even though he insisted on taking her to her first prenatal appointment, she could sense his anxiety. His phone buzzed incessantly during the ultrasound. When the doctor asked if he wanted to hear the baby's heartbeat, Richard gave a polite nod, but his gaze was anchored to the screen of his phone, texting a business partner about an upcoming deal. Still, Isabella hoped. After all, she had grown up believing that families stick together, that love endures. She imagined him softening over time, maybe placing a protective hand on her belly at night, reading parenting books with her, picking out cribs and baby clothes. Yet each day, his distance grew, and his frustration at her rapidly changing body was thinly veiled. Sometimes he made comments about how she should be careful not to gain too much weight, or how being a mother might affect her ability to accompany him to important events. They began to argue small disagreements at first that escalated into full-blown fights. One night, after attending a real estate conference in San Francisco, Richard accused her of ruining everything by announcing her pregnancy to an investor's wife. Isabella, wounded, reminded him that they were married and that the baby was their collective future. He stormed out of the suite, leaving her sobbing on the couch. When he returned hours later, she was still crying, eyes puffy and red. He offered no apology, only asked her to calm down and pull it together. She silently complied, a mixture of heartbreak and confusion swirling inside her. Though the warning signs flashed brighter each day, she clung to the idea that marriage meant weathering storms together. She never imagined the storm would culminate in abandonment, and that her faith in love and loyalty would be shattered so abruptly. A week after the San Francisco conference, Isabella woke up early to a sudden craving for pancakes. She tiptoed to the kitchen, hoping to make breakfast for Richard, to rekindle some kind of closeness. She carefully whisked the batter, thinking of how her mother used to say that the secret ingredient in a good pancake was a sprinkle of cinnamon and a dash of love. She plated the pancakes with fresh berries, warmed some syrup, and carried the tray into the bedroom. Richard was on a business call. He mouthed a "not now" and waved her away. Feeling foolish, she set the tray on a side table. His voice was edgy as he argued with whoever was on the other end of the line, talking about financial shortfalls, investor hesitations, and a pressing need to close deals fast. Isabella caught snippets of the conversation, speculation, possible lawsuits, something about a sudden dip in property values. It was an entirely different world, one that she had never truly been part of. After he hung up, Richard's shoulders slumped. He glanced at the now cold pancakes. "Bella, I have a crisis to handle," he said, voice strained. "I'm sorry for being short, but there's too much at stake right now." Trying to be supportive, she leaned forward and touched his arm gently. "I understand. Is there anything I can do? Just let me think," he snapped, immediately pulling away. He stood up and downed a cup of black coffee, ignoring the breakfast she had prepared. "I need to clear my head," he said. "I'll be out for a few hours." Isabella watched him leave, her heart heavier than it had ever felt. Once again, the distance between them widened, and she worried that no amount of love could bridge it. What she did not realize was that his business was teetering on the edge. Her pregnancy, an unexpected variable in his carefully orchestrated life plan, seemed to compound the stress he was already drowning in. That afternoon, Richard returned with a surprising proposition, a weekend trip to Redwood National Park. "We need to get away," he said, forcing a smile that reached nowhere near his eyes. I need to think, and you could use some fresh air." Isabella was stunned. She recalled how he had previously dismissed any idea of a nature trip, always preferring five-star resorts and glamorous hotspots. But if this was a chance to connect, she'd grasp it eagerly. Maybe the towering redwoods would remind them both of enduring strength. Maybe the clean air and quiet trails would help them rebuild their bond. Early that Saturday morning, they set off in Richard's Tesla Model S, speeding out of Los Angeles before dawn to avoid traffic. Isabella reclined in the passenger seat, a knot of anticipation in her stomach. She wished she could read his mood, but he kept his eyes on the road, responding to her attempts at conversation with monosyllables. She dozed in and out of uneasy sleep as the miles rolled by. By late afternoon, they reached a small town near Redwood National Park. Instead of checking into a cozy lodge as Isabella had expected, Richard insisted. They continued driving. She grew uneasy when the roads became narrower, the landscapes more remote. Giant redwood trees soon enveloped them on either side. The towering trunks and dense canopy felt both majestic and foreboding. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Isabella asked, noticing they had passed a sign warning that the next service station was miles away. Richard said nothing, just tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Finally, he pulled off onto a dirt-side road that led to a clearing. The car rumbled over gravel, slowing to a stop amidst the hulking trees. There was no sound except the whisper of a light breeze through the leaves. "Why are we stopping here?" Isabella asked, her heart pounding. He took a long, deep breath, like he was gathering courage or suppressing something. "We need to talk," he announced, reaching into the back seat and pulling out her small travel bag. "Get out." Feeling an icy tremor of dread, Isabella opened the passenger door. The immediate smell of damp earth and pine filled her senses. She noticed there was no one else around, no rangers, no hikers, not even a single passing car. Richard dropped her bag onto the dirt and stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I have to go," he said, voice unexpectedly calm. "You have to go," Isabella repeated, her mouth dry. She waited for him to explain, to say this was a pit stop or part of some odd plan. But the pit in her stomach told her something else was happening. Without looking at her, Richard slid back into the driver's seat and revved the engine. Panic roiled inside Isabella. "Richard, what are you doing?" she shouted, stepping toward the car. "Stop!" But he pressed the accelerator. The tires kicked up gravel. She jumped back to avoid being hit. Her eyes stung with tears and her pulse thundered in her ears. Within seconds, the Tesla vanished around the curve of the dirt road, leaving behind a cloud of dust that stung her nostrils. She stood there, pregnant and utterly alone, her mind reeling. "He can't really be leaving me here," she thought, refusing to believe it. The only sound was the faint chirping of birds in the canopy overhead. She reached into her pocket to call him, only to realize she had no cell service. Her voice trembled as she yelled for help, but the forest swallowed her cries. For the first time since she met Richard Davenport, Isabella felt true terror. She was stranded in a remote area, miles away from civilization, and she had no idea what he planned to do next. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Isabella's legs wobbled as she tried to hold herself steady on the uneven ground. Her mind raced. Why did he leave? Did something happen in the business that caused him to snap? Is he coming back? A part of her wanted to believe this was a horrendous joke or a twisted test. Yet her instincts screamed that this was all too real. She was pregnant, stranded, and terrified. Despite the swirling panic, the old survival instincts she gleaned from her rural upbringing started to kick in. She might have spent her high school years daydreaming about city life, but she still knew how to navigate rugged terrain and read the environment a bit. There was no immediate solution, but standing still and hoping for rescue wasn't an option. She rummaged through her bag and found a half-empty water bottle, a light jacket, and a few granola bars. Thankful she had packed at least something, she steeled herself to find a main road. The only route she could think of was to go back the way they had come, hoping she wouldn't get lost in the twisting dirt roads. The forest around her was eerily still as she walked. The towering redwoods, majestic though they were, cast long shadows that further heightened her sense of isolation. Occasionally she heard rustling in the underbrush, maybe squirrels, rabbits, or who knew what else. She tried to keep calm by focusing on each step, each breath. Hours passed, her feet aching in the inadequate shoes she'd worn for a weekend getaway. Never imagining a forced hike, her mind reeled with a toxic mix of anger and heartbreak. Dusk approached faster than she anticipated. The forest canopy thickened, stealing the last glimmers of sunlight. She realized she wouldn't make it to any main road before dark. Reluctantly, she decided to find a spot to rest and conserve energy. She gathered some dry leaves, placed her jacket on the ground, and tried to create a makeshift seat against a fallen log. "I have to get out of here tomorrow," she told herself, clinging to determination. But as the night deepened, the temperature dropped. Isabella shivered uncontrollably. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined Richard's face, stoic and distant, driving off. The memory ignited a wave of fury. How could he do this? Then sorrow overtook anger. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? She alternated between tears and trembling, occasionally nibbling a granola bar to keep her strength up. At one point, exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she slipped into a fitful sleep. Somewhere in the middle of the night, a sudden noise jerked her awake. Footsteps approached, accompanied by the glow of a flashlight beam piercing the darkness. Isabella's heartbeat roared in her ears, fear spiking. Then she heard a gentle voice. "M.A.M. Are you okay?" A man called out. "I'm Ranger Scott from Redwood National Park. One was on patrol and thought I saw a figure off the trail." Hope surged in her chest. "I'm here," she cried out, struggling to stand. The ranger shone his light on her pale face and trembling form. "You're not supposed to be out here alone this late," he said, concern etched into his features. He offered her a hand and helped her up. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears welling up again. "My husband, he left me. I'm pregnant." The words came out in a broken sob. Ranger Scott's concern turned to alarm. He radioed for assistance. Within an hour, an all-terrain park vehicle arrived to transport her to the ranger station. Isabella found herself wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping hot chocolate, tearfully explaining her ordeal to a female park ranger who took her statement. "Do you know why he left you here?" the ranger asked, trying to piece together the bizarre puzzle. "I don't know," Isabella admitted, her voice still quivering. "He's been stressed about his business. He barely talked the entire drive." She paused, eyes hollow. "One moment we were driving, then he just told me to get out and he drove off." They urged her to check into a nearby medical facility for a proper checkup, considering she was pregnant. The worry about potential dehydration or complications lingered. The kind rangers gave her a ride into the nearest town with a clinic. Exhausted Isabella let them handle everything. She felt like a leaf caught in a storm, helpless and battered by forces she never saw coming. At the clinic, a sympathetic nurse named Julia took her vitals and arranged for a scan of her baby. Isabella's eyes stung with tears when she saw the little shape on the ultrasound. At least her unborn child seemed unharmed. Even though her body still shivered from the night's cold, relief flooded through her for that one blessing. While waiting in the lobby after the exam, Isabella borrowed a phone from the receptionist and tried calling Richard. No answer. She left messages, texts, and emails that would go unanswered. It wasn't until dawn that she discovered, through a frantic call to a mutual acquaintance, the shocking truth. Richard had returned to Los Angeles at sunrise and had already filed for divorce. Isabella stared at the phone in disbelief. The voice on the other end belonged to Gregory Hayes, a junior associate at Richard's real estate firm, who had always been cordial to her at parties. He was breathless with shock. "I don't know what happened, Isabella, but Mr. Davenport flew back in early this morning." By 9 o'clock, the entire office was talking about how he filed for divorce. No one even knew you two were having problems. Her thoughts reeled. Within the span of 24 hours, she had been abandoned in a forest, discovered by a park ranger, and now learned that her husband of less than a year had filed for divorce. Pregnant or not, he's done with me. The cruelty of it stung like a physical blow. She tried to gather herself, pressing a shaky hand to her abdomen. "Gregory, please, can you at least tell me if my things are still in the penthouse?" Gregory paused. "I'm not sure, Isabella, but rumor has it that Mr. Davenport changed the security codes. He's telling people you'll be served with papers soon." It felt like the floor had vanished beneath her. She realized she had no home to go back to, no stable ground. But overshadowing her personal loss was the fear for the baby. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering, "I have you, and that's what matters." The kind staff at the clinic helped arrange a motel room for her in the nearest town, courtesy of a small voucher program the hospital ran for patients in need. The accommodations were modest: a single bed, a worn armchair, and a flickering TV. But after the night she'd had, it felt like a palace. She collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion claiming her. If not for her baby's presence, she might have sunk into a dark, bottomless despair. But she had to survive for this child. By the next morning, word had spread about her predicament. Rumors started swirling, even in Redwood National Park's tight-knit neighboring communities. A local news reporter caught wind of the story, though not all the details were accurate. Someone had spotted a wealthy man in a fancy electric car, driving at breakneck speed away from the park. Another local had seen the park rangers escort a distressed pregnant woman to a clinic. The puzzle was too tantalizing for the gossip mill to ignore. Isabella cringed at the thought of her shame becoming a local spectacle. Still, she had no time to dwell on embarrassment. She needed legal counsel. Fast. She called every number she could think of. The first few lawyers she reached wanted retainers she couldn't afford. Then, through a stroke of luck, she found a small law firm in the area that specialized in family law and took on pro bono cases for those in dire need. The firm, Quince and Farley, wasn't on par with the massive corporate law offices that Richard had at his beck and call, but it was her only hope. That same afternoon, she arrived at their office, a converted Victorian house with creaky floors and a friendly receptionist. There, she met Harriet Quince, a silver-haired, soft-spoken attorney with eyes that radiated kindness but also intelligence. "So, you're telling me," Harriet began after hearing a summary of Isabella's plight, "he abandoned you in the forest and filed for divorce immediately after?" "Yes," Isabella croaked, tears threatening to spill. "I don't know where else to turn." Harriet's eyebrows furrowed. "This is highly unusual, not to mention morally reprehensible. We can certainly file for a protective order, demand spousal support, and ensure you receive what you're entitled to, especially considering you're pregnant." Isabella felt a surge of gratitude. Finally, she had a lifeline. But Harriet wasn't done. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "Do you have any assets in your name? Any property or joint accounts?" Embarrassment twisted Isabella's stomach. "Not really. Everything is in Richard's name," she admitted. "He controlled all the finances. The credit card I have is a secondary card on his account, and I'm sure he's cancelled it by now." Harriet offered a sympathetic sigh. "We'll do everything we can legally. And I suggest you gather any evidence you have of his behavior, texts, emails, anything that shows his intentions or his abandonment. In the meantime, we'll file an emergency motion for support to ensure your medical bills are covered." In that moment, Isabella realized how deeply she'd been controlled. She had no separate bank account, no property, no nest egg. All this time, she had believed she was cherished and protected. How naive I've been, she thought, but she wouldn't give up. She had to fight. If not for herself, then for the tiny life growing inside her. When she left Quince and Farley, the sun was setting again. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the main street. Isabella inhaled, feeling a new sense of purpose. She might be battered, but she wasn't broken. She was determined to stand her ground, no matter how wealthy and influential Richard was. As she made her way back to the motel, she checked her phone. Still no messages from Richard. No apologies, no explanations. But she was done searching for them. The day he drove away had been the day she realized she was on her own. Now she had a mission to ensure justice for herself and her unborn child. While Isabella prepared to wage her battle in a small, unassuming motel room in Northern California, Richard Davenport was busy orchestrating his narrative in Los Angeles. He spun a story of marital discord, framing Isabella as an opportunistic partner who had threatened his business dealings. Rumors circulated at gala events. She had allegedly tried to sabotage a critical real estate deal. She was unstable. The pregnancy had blindsided him. People exchanged hushed whispers in gilded ballrooms, sipping imported champagne while dissecting the drama. In that circle, image was everything, and Richard's version of the story seemed to carry weight. One person, however, refused to swallow Richard's account without question: Natalie, Isabella's childhood friend. She had seen firsthand how much Isabella adored Richard. The abruptness of it all didn't sit right with her. Determined to uncover the truth, Natalie reached out to Gregory Hayes, the junior associate who had tipped Isabella off. Over a furtive coffee meeting, Gregory confessed that the real estate empire Richard boasted about was teetering on the brink of collapse. He's leveraged up to his eyeballs, Gregory confided. The new commercial properties he bought aren't generating the returns he projected. Investors are furious. Some are preparing to sue. He's in too deep. He paused, glancing around as if expecting to see Richard appear out of nowhere. I also heard rumors that he blames Isabella for distracting him from closing critical deals. But that's just Richard's twisted perspective. Honestly, none of this is her fault. Natalie felt her blood boil. She immediately tried to reach Isabella, but found her phone going straight to voicemail. Undeterred, she decided to travel to Redwood National Park to find her friend. Within 2 days, Natalie arrived at the little motel, hauling a suitcase full of clothes, snacks, and moral support. When Isabella opened the door and saw Natalie standing there, she threw her arms around her friend and wept. "It's okay, Bella," Natalie whispered, rubbing her back. "I'm here now." They spent hours talking in that cramped motel room. Isabella recounted the terror of being left in the forest and the crushing news of the divorce filing. Natalie shared what she had learned from Gregory. Together, they began piecing together the puzzle: Richard's crumbling financial empire, his sudden panic about fatherhood, and his willingness to throw Isabella under the bus, to save face or to salvage what remained of his business. "He wants to paint you as the cause of his downfall," Natalie said, disgust evident in her tone. "But we're not going to let him." The next morning, Natalie accompanied Isabella to a meeting at Quince and Farley. Harriet Quince listened intently as Natalie provided new insights into Richard's financial troubles. The attorney's eyes gleamed with a mixture of surprise and vindication. "This changes the approach," Harriet said. "If we can establish that he's been misrepresenting assets or deflecting blame, we might have leverage to ensure Isabella gets proper support, especially with a child on the way." Harriet wasted no time. She filed additional motions to scrutinize Richard's finances, pushing for a formal investigation into any hidden assets or accounts. She also coordinated with local authorities to document Isabella's abandonment. Abandonment under these circumstances, especially with a pregnant spouse, could hold significant weight in divorce proceedings, even in a no-fault state. Meanwhile, Isabella found unexpected solace in Redwood National Park. In a twist of poetic irony, the place where she had been left to fend for herself was also where she found her inner strength. Each morning, she walked along the edge of the park's trails, inhaling the cedar-scented air, letting the towering redwoods remind her that life endured storms far more brutal than her own heartbreak. The park rangers, who recognized her from that fateful night, often waved and asked how she was doing. Their kindness was a balm on her wounded spirit. The pieces of her old life slipped away. She missed the penthouse, the lavish dinners, the sense of security, or what she had naively believed was security. Yet she also felt liberated. For the first time, she was forced to rely on her own resourcefulness. She learned to manage her finances carefully, using what little she had for prenatal vitamins and modest meals. She kept her credit card payments minimal, though she was sure Richard had cut off most of her access by now. Even so, the emotional toll was enormous. On some nights, she woke up gasping from nightmares of being alone in the dark forest, calling out Richard's name in vain. On others, she'd dream of the baby, imagining a tiny hand curling around her finger, only to awaken tearful and disoriented. Yet each time she felt her child move a flutter in her belly, she remembered her purpose. This baby deserved a chance at life unburdened by fear and abandonment. Natalie did her best to cheer her up with small acts of kindness, bringing fresh flowers to decorate the motel room, playing Isabella's favorite country songs, even filming silly vlog-style videos to lighten the mood. Isabella would often blink back tears of gratitude. She might have lost her husband, her home, and her illusions, but she had not lost true friendship or her own willpower. As the weeks rolled by, Harriet's legal actions began to escalate. Court dates loomed. Richard's legal team responded with threats, claiming Isabella was unfit to demand spousal support or to keep custody of the unborn child. They painted a picture of a manipulative gold digger who only married Richard to claim his fortune. The audacity of these accusations angered Isabella, fueling a fiery determination within her. She was done being meek. She would fight back, not just for herself, but for her baby's future. And while legal papers flew back and forth, another battle was quietly brewing. Richard's empire was crumbling, and he was about to discover just how vicious karma could be. The first public sign of Richard's unraveling came via a devastating headline in the Los Angeles Times: Real Estate. Mogul Richard Davenport faces potential lawsuit over fraud allegations. It appeared that at least 2 major investors claimed he had misled them about profits and valuations. The article hinted that more investors might follow suit. Overnight, his name turned from that of a celebrated up-and-comer to a disgraced businessman on the brink of scandal. For Isabella, seeing that article brought a conflicted mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She took no pleasure in watching a man she had once loved being publicly taken down, but she couldn't ignore the fact that his empire's decline was poetic justice for the way he'd treated her, especially leaving her pregnant and alone in Redwood National Park. Meanwhile, Harriet Quince pressed forward with the legal case against Richard. She wrote letter after letter to his attorneys, demanding to know how he planned to provide for his pregnant wife. Yet the only response from Richard's side remained combative. They insisted Isabella was no longer a relevant party, a phrase so callous it left Isabella stunned. Then one day, Harriet received a tip from a contact in the real estate world. Richard was preparing to liquidate several properties under his name, possibly to stash away any proceeds and keep them out of reach during the divorce. In a race against time, Harriet filed an emergency injunction, hoping to freeze his assets and ensure Isabella's rightful share wouldn't vanish. As the legal drama intensified, Isabella's personal life took an unexpected turn. She had managed to find a short-term administrative job at a local non-profit that assisted underprivileged families. It didn't pay much, but it provided her with a sense of routine and purpose. The staff welcomed her warmly, and she often found herself connecting with struggling mothers who recognized her own quiet determination. She kept her situation private, not wanting to gossip about her estranged millionaire husband. Instead, she focused on the tasks at hand, drafting proposals, organizing small charity events, and found solace in helping others. The Redwood community embraced her too. She made new friends who didn't care about her connection to wealth or status. An older couple who ran a diner near the motel, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, treated her like family. She began to feel that perhaps this quiet, grounded life was more real than the glitz and glamour she'd left behind. One crisp morning, while sipping tea at the diner, Isabella got a call from Harriet's office. The tone of Harriet's voice signaled that something big had happened. "He wants to propose a settlement," Harriet announced. "Richard?" Isabella asked, nearly dropping her cup. "Why now?" Harriet explained that Richard's lawyers had reached out with a preliminary offer. They wanted Isabella to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a sizable sum, enough to cover basic living expenses and medical costs. But there was a catch. The settlement demanded that Isabella relinquish any claims to Richard's current or future assets, accept a no-contest divorce, and most horrifically renounce parental rights to the child once it was born if Richard chose to claim custody later. Isabella's stomach turned. "That's insane," she whispered, her voice laced with anger. "He abandons me, then wants me to give up the child." Harriet's reply was calm but resolute. "We'll reject this. It's insulting. However, we need to be prepared that he might escalate." Sure enough, the next day, a letter arrived for Isabella at Quince and Farley. It contained explicit threats, disguised as legal jargon mention of defamation countersuits, statements that suggested Isabella was unstable, references to evidence that might paint her as unfit to be a mother. The letter even included a flimsy claim that the baby might not be Richard's. "It's absolutely disgusting," Harriet fumed, slapping the document down on her desk. "He'll throw anything at the wall to see what sticks. We'll respond in kind." Despite Harriet's unwavering support, Isabella felt her courage waver. She called Natalie that night, her voice shaking. "I'm terrified. What if he somehow convinces a judge I'm an unfit mother? I have no money, no steady home." "It's his word against mine." Natalie's response was firm. "Then we'll prove otherwise, Bella. We'll show the world who he really is. You're not alone. You have me, Harriet, and everyone who knows the truth." And so Isabella took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared for the next round of the fight. She wasn't the same naive woman who had once believed in unconditional love without question. She had been tested, broken down, and forced to rebuild piece by piece. Now, every choice she made was for her child's future. As legal proceedings advanced, Richard's downfall continued. The lawsuits against him multiplied, tarnishing his name further. High-profile associates started to distance themselves, refusing to stand by a man accused not only of fraud, but also of abandoning his pregnant wife. Ironically, the Redwood National Park fiasco had captured public attention, fueling a wave of online criticism. People who heard Isabella's story labeled Richard a heartless monster. A trending hashtag emerged on social media, #StandByIsabella, sparked by a local Redwood blogger who'd learned about her ordeal. News outlets picked up the hashtag, unleashing a torrent of negative PR on Richard. Those who had once envied his success now reveled in his disgrace. And as each day passed, Isabella grew stronger, nurtured by the quiet Redwood community, her unwavering friend, Natalie, and a baby growing steadily inside her. The storm raged on, but she no longer felt powerless. She was forging a new destiny, one that would soon collide with Richards in a final, dramatic confrontation. As the court date neared for the preliminary divorce hearing, Isabella found herself in a swirl of emotions. She sat in Quince and Farley's modest conference room, reviewing documents and statements. Each page was a reminder of the life she'd lost and the terrifying legal labyrinth she now navigated. Harriet guided her patiently, making sure she understood every detail before she signed off on testimonies or affidavits. The hearing would determine temporary spousal support, medical coverage, and set the stage for further proceedings. Most crucially, it would address the question of the unborn child's paternity and custody arrangements. Once the baby arrived, on the morning of the hearing, Isabella stood in front of the mirror in her motel room, smoothing the wrinkles of a second-hand black blazer and a flowing dress that concealed her growing bump. She inhaled slowly, reminding herself that she was no longer the timid girl following her husband's lead. She was here to protect her future and her babies. Natalie drove her to the courthouse, offering quiet reassurances along the way. They arrived to find a small crowd of reporters hovering, cameras ready. "Miss Davenport, do you have any statement? Is it true your husband left you in the wilderness? Are the fraud allegations connected to your divorce?" The questions flew in rapid succession, but Isabella pressed her lips together and walked on, refusing to engage. Harriet had advised her to stay silent and let the legal work speak for itself. Inside, the courtroom was tense. Richard sat at one table, flanked by two expensive lawyers who whispered furiously in his ear. He barely looked at Isabella, his face fixed in a mask of stern indifference. Isabella, for her part, felt a swell of nausea, not just from pregnancy, but from the heartbreak of seeing the man she'd once loved turned into a stranger. Harriet began by laying out the facts: Isabella's pregnancy, her abandonment in Redwood National Park, and Richard's immediate filing for divorce. She presented medical records confirming the pregnancy, the ranger's report detailing Isabella's rescue, and the timeline that painted a stark picture of intentional desertion. Richard's lawyers attempted to flip the narrative. They argued Isabella was unpredictable, that she had threatened Richard with baseless demands upon discovering she was pregnant. They even insinuated that the baby might not be Richard's, calling into question Isabella's fidelity. Harriet swiftly countered by pointing out that no evidence supported these claims. She added that such allegations were a transparent attempt to dodge responsibility. As the hearing went on, Richard's mask cracked ever so slightly. He shot Isabella glances that ranged from anger to desperation. At one point, he even seemed on the verge of speaking up himself, but his lawyers held him back. The judge, a stern woman with graying hair, listened intently to both sides. Then she leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Mr. Davenport, the claims against you are serious," she said. "Deserting a pregnant spouse in a remote location could be construed as endangerment. Until further investigation, I'm granting Miss Davenport a temporary protective order. Also, Mr. Davenport, you are required to cover her medical costs related to the pregnancy, as well as provide adequate spousal support until this matter is resolved. Is that understood?" A wave of relief and triumph surged through Isabella, even though she kept her expression neutral. Richard had no choice but to nod, his jaw tight. The judge signed off on the order, then scheduled the next hearing for a few months later, closer to Isabella's due date. After the gavel fell, reporters swarmed Isabella once more, but Harriet and Natalie shielded her as they exited the courtroom. She caught a glimpse of Richard across the lobby, scowling as his lawyers fielded questions. There was something feral in his eyes, a caged beast losing control. Over the next few days, the media storm intensified. The Redwood abandonment story became a national headline. Millionaire leaves pregnant wife in forest judge orders support. Isabella felt an odd dissonance, seeing her private tragedy plastered across tabloids, but she also recognized the tide of public opinion had turned overwhelmingly in her favor. People were horrified by Richard's actions, and every new detail that emerged from the lawsuits against him only fueled the uproar. Former business partners came forward with more accusations of shady dealings, mismanagement, and unethical practices. The once dazzling empire of Richard Davenport was swiftly turning to ash. Isabella tried to focus on her own future, leaning into her job at the non-profit and preparing for motherhood. She was offered a more stable position, coordinating events and donor relations. Working there let her see how resilient people could be under dire circumstances, reminding her that her own situation, as harrowing as it was, could be overcome with courage and the support of others. That realization spurred her to start a personal journal, documenting her transformation. She wrote down the night in Redwood National Park, the fear she felt, and the fierce love she already had for her unborn baby. She chronicled her legal battles, her anxieties about public scrutiny, and the small victories that kept her going. One evening, Harriet called with an update. "We've discovered some questionable transfers in Richard's accounts," she explained. "He might have been funneling money into offshore assets. If we can prove this, it'll strengthen our case for a fair settlement." Isabella clutched the phone tighter. "Good. I want him to be held accountable, Harriet. I want him to realize that money and power don't give him the right to discard people like trash. He's learning that lesson the hard way," Harriet said softly. "But be prepared, he's wounded, and wounded people can lash out." Isabella knew that was true. She braced herself for whatever Richard might try next, because even as the public outcry mounted and legal pressures boxed him in, she sensed he wasn't done fighting, and she wouldn't be safe until the final verdict was in. Regardless, she felt stronger than ever. The redwood trees swayed under the night sky, a silent testament to nature's resilience. She thought of how their rings told stories of storms weathered, fires survived. "I'm weathering my storm," she told herself, "and I will survive too." Life can change in an instant. Isabella had learned that the hard way. But in the months following the preliminary hearing, she discovered that life could also change through small, persistent steps forward. Her belly grew, and with it, her sense of hope. She found a modest apartment above a bookstore in the same small town near Redwood National Park. The landlord, an older woman named Agnes, greeted her warmly. "I've heard about your situation," she said, refusing to gawk or pry. "We've all got tough stories, dear, but you're safe here." The apartment wasn't luxurious, just a cozy bedroom, a living area, and a kitchen that overlooked the town's main street, but it was hers. The first place that felt like a genuine home. On weekends, Isabella volunteered at a local shelter for expectant mothers. Some recognized her from the news, and she used her experiences to comfort others who felt betrayed or abandoned. She spoke of resilience, even though she sometimes struggled with her own doubts at night. She realized that each time she offered words of encouragement, she was also offering them to herself. Meanwhile, Richard's world was collapsing at a bewildering speed. Newspaper reports detailed multiple lawsuits alleging fraud and breach of contract. A federal investigation was rumored to be underway, examining whether Richard had falsified property values. People who once flocked to his lavish parties now deleted his number and avoided him in public. Ironically, his spectacular fall from grace only seemed to add to the wave of empathy and support that poured toward Isabella. Despite that outpouring of public sympathy, the legal process remained grueling. Harriet continued to uncover more evidence that Richard had been funneling assets into hidden accounts. He still tried to fight back, filing counterclaims in an attempt to stall or intimidate. One claim asserted that Isabella was an unfit mother because she lacked the financial means to care for a child without Richard's support. Another claimed she abandoned the marriage when she refused to move back in with him, a blatant lie that disregarded the fact he had literally left her in the wilderness. But each time Richard pressed a false narrative, Harriet countered with cold, hard evidence. The protective order remained in place, and the judge issued a stern warning that if Richard continued to harass Isabella or file frivolous motions, he would face contempt charges. Eventually, Richard's legal team tried a new tactic. They reached out privately to Harriet, suggesting a more amicable settlement. They proposed a lump sum payment to Isabella in exchange for dropping any further claims and signing a strict confidentiality agreement. This time, the amount was even larger, enough to provide for Isabella and her child for many years. But it also came with a demand. Richard wanted no claim to the child. He wanted to wash his hands of them entirely. Late one night, Harriet and Isabella sat together in the law firm's conference room, reviewing the settlement offer. Isabella ran her fingers over her growing belly, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's more than enough to make a fresh start," Harriet said gently. "But it also means relinquishing the right to pursue him for child support later. If you sign this, you're effectively cutting him out of your life forever, and your child's life as well." Isabella stared at the papers. It was surreal. The man she had once adored, who had promised her a fairy tale marriage, was now willing to pay her off just to disappear. Part of her quivered with rage. Another part felt an unexpected tinge of relief. Life would be simpler if he was gone for good. Yet there was a bigger question. Did she want Richard Davenport to have any legal foothold in her child's life? Could she trust that he wouldn't show up years later, demanding custody or interfering out of spite? And even if he never cared to be a father, would her child one day question why they were cut off from half their family? "I don't want his money," Isabella whispered finally, her voice trembling with conviction. "I only want enough to ensure my baby is cared for. But I'm terrified he'll hurt us in the future if he has any legal claim." Harriet pressed her lips together. "We can negotiate. The courts tend to favor the mother in a situation like this, especially given his abandonment. If you want to ensure he has no involvement, we can pursue that route. But you're entitled to the financial support, Isabella. You can't just walk away with nothing." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'll take what's fair," she said, "but I won't sign away my child's right to know the truth. If they grow up and want to find him, I can't be the one who stood in the way. That's my final say. No more hush money." Harriet nodded, respect clear in her gaze. "We'll proceed, and if he really wants to sign away parental rights, let him do so under the court's supervision, not through hush money." That night, Isabella prayed for strength. She prayed for her child, that they would never feel the sting of abandonment. And, ironically, she prayed for Richard too, that one day he might see the error of his ways. But she would not beg him to change. She was done with illusions. The next week, Harriet sent a counter-proposal to Richard's team, stating that Isabella would accept a fair settlement, one that included consistent child support unless Richard legally and publicly relinquished parental rights through due process. No confidentiality agreement, no hush money, take it or leave it. Days turned to weeks with no immediate response. Isabella didn't hold her breath. She continued preparing for the baby, setting up a small crib by the window of her new apartment, crocheting tiny blankets with yarn donated by local mothers. She was building a new life from the remnants of her old one, determined to create a safe haven no matter what storms still raged outside. Karma arrived for Richard Davenport with quiet inevitability. His once prized real estate empire buckled under a flurry of lawsuits and allegations of fraud. Investors withdrew their money, federal investigators froze his accounts, and the media hammered away at his reputation. The man who had abandoned his pregnant wife in the wilderness now found himself abandoned by nearly everyone he once counted on. Meanwhile, Isabella entered her third trimester with cautious optimism. She'd secured a modest apartment above a bookstore and continued her work at the local nonprofit. The Redwood community rallied around her, providing emotional support and small tokens of kindness. Though she kept up with the legal proceedings, thanks to Harriet's diligent efforts, she tried not to let them overshadow her preparations for motherhood. Then, late one stormy night, Isabella went into labor. Natalie rushed her to the hospital, where a challenging but successful delivery ended in the cry of a healthy baby boy. Holding him in her arms, she felt a flood of relief and unbreakable love. Shortly after the birth, Richard attempted to visit the hospital, possibly to polish his image or cling to some paternal claim, but the protective order kept him out. Within days, Harriet arrived with news that Richard had officially relinquished his parental rights and finalized the divorce settlement. Perhaps it was a desperate move to avoid further legal trouble, or maybe the gravity of his wrongdoing had finally sunk in. Either way, he made no further attempts to contact Isabella or his child. With that, the chapter of Richard Davenport came to an end. Isabella took her son home to a new life, free from the shadows of deceit. She had discovered her own resilience and reclaimed control of her destiny. While Richard's name continued to surface in scandalous headlines, she no longer felt any fear or regret, only a deep gratitude for her second chance. The redwood trees stood tall outside her window, reminding her that even the fiercest storms eventually pass, leaving growth and renewal in their wake. And so ends the tumultuous tale of a millionaire who left his pregnant wife in the middle of nowhere only to see his empire crumble under the weight of betrayal and deceit. Life granted Isabella the sweet reward of a fresh start, wrapped in the miracle of her baby boy's smile, and showed Richard that no amount of money could shield him from accountability. This story is a testament to the power of resilience, friendship, and the unwavering belief that love, true love, is about protection, compassion, and mutual respect. If you found this tale moving, make sure to like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a story of justice and redemption, and subscribe to our channel. By supporting this story, you help us reach more people who need to be reminded that hope shines brightest when life is darkest. Thank you for watching.